Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of What Would Chobra Do, a series that we're doing to cover Champions Seoul from the perspective of the 4 teams representing VCT Pacific. Now, we don't have any time to dawdle as the opening matches are already kicking off, and we still have 2 more to cover, and that's going to be TLN Esports and PRX. And as I was planning this episode, I realized I made a very big mistake because TLN Esports and PRX, I don't even know what they're going to do. So I don't know if it even matters what I think the opponents are going to do, because these 2 teams are, they are probably the 2 of the craziest teams that we have in Pacific. So this is a bit of it's a little bit dizzying, but we'll see what we can do. And we'll at least try to identify what patterns to look out for if you're cheering for the Pacific teams coming up from their opponents. Now, their opponents, thankfully, have actually faced off against each other a couple of times in recent memory, as they are going to be the grand finalists of VCT Americas. It is Leviathan and G2. Leviathan eventually took the trophy, they took first place, and they will be going up against TLN Esports in the opening match Group C, and then it will be G2 coming up in a spicy rematch against PRX in the opening match of Group D. So without further ado, let us jump in to figure out how our Pacific teams can try to take that sweet, sweet victory in their opening matches. Flashing news! By the way, we have watch party rights, so now we can do the live portion of What Would Chobra Do. So anytime that I am available to do so, I'm going to be watch partying and co-streaming the Pacific team's matches and watching it from the point of view of an IGL and a coach. I'm going to try to explain what we're seeing on the minimap, but what the team might not know and how they should adjust to it, what the next step should be, and also maybe what should be discussed during the timeouts as well. So if you're interested in seeing how this all comes together live during a match on top of it, then make sure you tune into our live streams both on Twitch and here on YouTube. Before we jump into the patterns and tendencies of Leviathan, I just want to put a disclaimer out there that yes, the scariest part of Leviathan is probably Aspas. And I don't just mean Aspas himself, but the fact that Leviathan is very, very cognizant of the fact that they have a powerful weapon in Aspas, and they do their darndest to set him up for even more success. So they work very well around him, but also not like all-inning on Aspas go kill as a strategy. But I'm talking more of the micro plays, the small tactics that they're employing to make sure Aspas can get those first kills, succeed in the contact, etc. So I just want to put that out there. Like, this is the guy that can flip rounds on its head on any given day on any given map. So that's something you'll just have to watch out for. But we'll come back to that later. Now let's talk about the overall team tendencies and patterns. Now, one of the first things I noticed about Leviathan is that across all the years, some things never change, and they still like to fight. And the biggest tell in the current meta that they enjoy this is the fact that they're leaning heavily into the Neon and Breach combo, the ultimate stun combo of Valorant. Now, why is this important? It's important because, first of all, you better watch out, because if you get stunned and Aspas is coming in sliding at you, yeah, you're probably at a disadvantage no matter how cosmetic that stun might be. But on top of that, the fact that you are now utilizing a duelist who, one of their biggest advantages is the fact that they have a self-sufficient stun and that they can, slide out of it instantly to get an advantageous fight. On top of that, one of your initiators, if you're playing the Breach, has no info. All they do is fight better, right? All they do is set up fights and clear corners. So now 2 out of 5 members on your Asian composition revolve around fighting. So you're going to be fighting to take control of space, right? This is not a composition. As soon as you have those 2, this is not a composition that's all about passively using util to just clear out space, to scare people away, to get information, to identify who's where. No, you're identifying who's where by clearing that space and going out and taking a fight. That's how Leviathan is going to play 3 out of the 7 maps if they continue with this composition. And quite frankly, I'm not going to expect them to change it much. The maps that they're playing it on are totally reasonable, because it's going to be Lotus. The Neon's been running rampant, quite frankly. Sunset, same thing. And Haven, where I think it works very well. And the Breach has always been a staple on Haven. These are maps, especially Lotus and Haven, where you should be willing to kind of give up another part of the map, whether it's on attack or defense, right? It's going to be very hard for you to always be spread out across in a very, very even default, whether it's attack or defense. So now, if you're able to take space even more aggressively, that's going to make the map a little bit easier for you to play. So this is something that Leviathan is focusing on, and it generally rings true for their other compositions, because here's the other thing. This is one of the teams that still utilizes the Harbor on maps like Icebox, and they tried it on Abyss as well. And then they've tried the Deadlock as well. What do these have in common? Well, these are agents that now don't let you get away from the fight, right? It really closes off the fight and puts you in a cage, sometimes literally in the case of deadlock. And now you're forced to fight when they choose. Otherwise, you have to just give up that space. So again, a lot of their philosophy revolves around the fact that we're going to initiate a fight. And now if you try to run away from it, you're at a disadvantage. If you stick around, you're at a disadvantage. Kind of not fair, but hey, that's the way Leviathan wants to play Valorant.
As always, I really appreciate all the support you've shown to the channel and this series, and there's nothing better to show good support than a comment down below, a like on the video, and of course subscribe to the channel if you'd like to make sure you get to watch the videos as soon as they come out. Thank you so much.
Now back to the program. Now the next thing that you should keep in mind when you are playing against Leviathan is the fact that literally anyone and everyone on this team can lurk. And sometimes it's very, very late. And this is not just a meme about Calm because he was great at late, super late lurks last year when he was able to lift the Champions Trophy with EG. But seriously, like this team, their one big curveball when it comes to macro play is lurks. And it's late lurks a lot of the time. This is important because outside of that, while I give credit to Leviathan and King as the IGL that they do have mid-rounding, right? It's not just straightforward. It's not just, hey, we picked C site, let's go, let's fight. It's not straightforward. It's not, well, not straightforward. It's not one-dimensional, but generally the way they work the map is very logical. And I specifically use the word logical because sometimes the only way to throw a curveball to your opponent is to make a illogical choice, right? You have to create these rounds where the opponent is just flustered and they're flabbergasted and they can't help but say, what in the world are you doing here at this time? Those are the moves you have to make to eventually lift an international trophy, in my opinion. And so far, I haven't seen too much of that from Leviathan. It's very good, but it's quite textbook and it's very reasonable. And those are things that, again, if you're playing against, let's say, you know, great teams like G2 who have great IGLs back at Americas, they'll start to pick up on those patterns, right? Because it starts to get very, very straightforward. So while that's maybe a bit of a weakness for Leviathan, the one curveball they do have are very, very late lurks and very timely lurks. And the fact that, again, it is not any one designated person. It all depends on how that round has played out. So as long as you eliminate that option, whether you're clearing that space potential of lurks, you know, or whether you're just always keeping in mind, or maybe you're trying to get ahead of it, whatever method you choose, you eliminate that and the macro play should get a little bit more straightforward. Last but not least, always suspect that there is an Aspas around the corner. They know Aspas is their star player. It's very clear because nobody has the ego to say that they're not gonna bait and switch for Aspas. It just doesn't matter who it is. If they are there and they want to take space and Aspas is nearby, someone will take contact and then they'll bait and switch and Aspas will come out and get the kill. It happens very often. So it doesn't matter if you're looking at Tex and you think he's a sentinel, surely he's lurking alone. Nuh-uh. There could be an Aspas around the corner. Is it Calm? There could be an Aspas around the corner. Is it Mazzino? There's like definitely an Aspas around the corner. So you just always have to expect the second swing out. You should always be keeping in mind that I probably want to fight Aspas and not the guy I'm looking at on my screen. With that in mind, if I was TLN Esports, what would Chobra do? Well, I'll be honest. Quite frankly, I can't get into Talon's shoes because they're already too crazy. Like, I thought I was crazy, but like Talon is crazier. And that's great. I love it, but I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I can imagine what comps they might bring out. However, I am going to say, because they are able to cook comps, there's actually some good news here for TLN Esports. Because you look at the way that Leviathan plays, you look at the way that they want to fight early to get space, right? The way they control space before the final play of the round is by fighting, is by using util. That means, especially when Leviathan is attacking, a lot of times they're actually going to try to push out further, just a bit further, to make sure that they have the extra reach to cut off the retake. They want to take the fight to you before you are able to retake. Well, you have two options in my opinion. The first one is you could go even crazier and take the fight to them. You could try to fight early, you could try to beat their tempo. I'm just going to go ahead and say I don't recommend this for Talon Esports because I feel like Talon Esports, especially like listening to some of their comms videos and just the way, they talk about the game and the interviews, or the way Coach Frost talks about his players, they seem to get very, very excited about hunting for frags. And I feel like it's just a danger zone. It's not that I don't think that they are necessarily capable. Granted, Aspas is really, 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 really good. But as a team, like I think Talon, if they set things up right, like you could catch Leviathan by surprise, sure. But I feel like this is setting yourself up for even more failure by tripping over yourself. So personally, I'm going to shy away from that one. But then what's the other option? Well, it's to have a really good staggered retreat. So you want to make sure that they are using util early on to take space, dry out the util, and then make sure that you respect that they might want to take one extra step. Maybe you're there earlier. You can try to blockade it. Sure, some rounds that's going to work if you have a really good early read. But otherwise, a staggered retreat, not just giving them space, but a staggered retreat to make sure maybe they're still taking chip damage, or they try to get as much space, but maybe you're throwing your util early at that point once you're going for the retake to kind of push them back in, right? You can't possibly try to think that, hey, we're going to be able to set up for the grand old set retake when you're playing against a team like Leviathan, because they're going to have, 1, 2, 3 players just a couple steps ahead of the regular positions in the site. So setting up, whether it's patterns and protocols for the staggered retreat to make sure you're drawing them out, maybe that gives you more time to go even further into the lurk. That eliminates the possibility of a late and deep lurk from Leviathan themselves. Maybe it's just to make sure that Leviathan actually overextends just a bit, and then you can cut them off, right? Things like that. That's something. Maybe you have compositions that can now do that really well. And I don't know if it's Talon Esports. I'm sure they can figure that out. The next thing that I would love to see Talon Esports do is actually utilize some good trap plays. Something that G2 actually used fairly successfully against Leviathan. Now, the problem with this, though, is that it works better on certain maps than others, right? So, again, take for instance, if it's a 3-site map, the trap plays are not going to be as easy because they're going to have a couple more options. And also they start to get read a little bit more. But then if you're bringing them into these maps where their rotations are going to be even more straightforward, right? Even more logical, I think you're going to have a decent chance of saying, okay, we've pushed them off. The audio's cut off. They're going to be rotating because they play very logically and straightforward. Now we set up a trap play on the other side to cut them off early, or to dwindle the numbers, or maybe to cut off the one who is lurking and trying to wait for more information. So these trap plays seem to work really well against Leviathan, but ones where you're really setting up for a better trade. Ones where you're willing to take some hits, but you're coming out on top on the numbers. Not ones where you're like, hey, super wombo combo. I mean, that can work every now and then, but it's much more about, because of the fact that Leviathan wants to fight to take space, and then they slowly run out, right? They play a bit of an aggro style. They slowly run out of their resources by the time they get into the site, or by the time they're coming in for the retake. Then you catch them off guard one step ahead, a little bit of a plant, and then go for a trade. And last but not least, and perhaps the most important to keep in mind the whole time, is to always, always, always be prepared for Aspas to swing out for a trade. Whether you got the first kill or not, Aspas is around that corner. Aspas is going to swing out. He's going to take you out. Now, listen, I don't think it's good to tell your players to play scared, right? I don't think you should be like, whoa, it's Aspas. Like, he's one of the greatest in the world. He is, but like, you shouldn't play like that. But also, you shouldn't ego it, right? And it's okay to just be like, hey, I got one kill, I'm going to back off. Or I didn't get the first kill, but now we have info. We know that Leviathan likes to play very, very logically around the map. That's going to be 2 people here. If you hear Aspas swinging out, or even if you catch sight of him, you back off and you say, all right, this is the main force. There's, 3, 4 people here. Let's clear out the other side. Maybe we'll do a staggered retreat. Maybe we delay even further. We get help with util. It depends on which comp you're playing. Just always keep in mind that you are not there to get all the kills. I think that's going to be very important when fighting against Leviathan. And I'm emphasizing this because, again, I think the players on Talon Esports get a little bit excited when they start fragging out. And I think it's very hard to find that balance of like keeping confidence but not overheating. It's very tough, but I have faith that they can do it. Now, we take a look at the maps, and obviously there are some very, very clear priorities here for Leviathan. I mean, Icebox picked 8 times, played 15 times, 80% win rate so far on that, 63% attacking win rate. They're like almost never losing the attacking half, ever. And then you have Sunset at 70%, 7 out of 10 games played. Lotus at 66%, 6 out of 9 games. All very solid. Haven even up there, obviously only played 3 times, though. So take that with a grain of salt. Now, Ascent is their go-to ban. Surprisingly, Lotus as well, but that was more so in the beginning of the year. So there's been quite a shift, and I think Leviathan has done a very good job of balancing out their map pool for the entire year. That does make them pretty strong. However, again, they're trying to lean heavy into the Neon and Breach. I think it's going to be very helpful if you can try to veer away from that, right? Don't take the fight where they're comfortable. Veer away from that. Force them into these compositions that aren't as strong at fighting, right? Because then the next one step is to just make sure you're very aware of the operator timing. Because if you're playing a composition, if you're a team that loves to fight, but you're playing a composition that can't always take the fight, then the next thing to do is try to take contact. And the best way to do that, you know, once you have the economy, is to have the operator. You take contact, you clear it, you sit there with the operator. Now the map's easier for you. So I'm not saying like fight Aspas on the op. I mean, probably don't do that every time, but you can try to pilot the map draft to make sure that you're getting into these positions where you don't have to worry too much. Now, just so we're very clear, I think that's why they're choosing to play things like the Deadlock and the Harbor on these other maps where the Breach Neon isn't going to work for them, because that way they can still take contact and then close off the fight to make sure that they are overpowering you. So it's not all easy. I mean, listen, Leviathan has a great win rate over the whole year. They're looking very strong. I think they're actually coming online a bit more coming into Champions. So I think it's tough, but I do think they have a very distinct style, and I don't think it's the macro play that's leaps and bounds above. I think it's much more the micro play that is very strong for this team, and you can eliminate some of the strengths of their map draft to get away from it. Next, let's talk about G2. Now, this is a bit of a spicy rematch because PRX picked G2 at Master Shanghai, where we had the first seeds able to pick their opponents going into the playoffs. They confidently picked G2 as the first pick and promptly lost the match. G2 has been looking scary all year, but admittedly, they've kind of been a silent killer. And I'll admit it, I didn't rank them as high when it was at Master Shanghai. I didn't think they were bad, but I didn't rate them as high as I probably should have. And the more I look at it and seeing how they've been playing now in Stage 2, leading into Champions, it actually starts to all click. Because to me, G2 is the actual successor to DRX. G2 plays a very util info heavy style. And then they have an IGL who can process all that brilliantly to make the right call, and now they have an extra layer of mid-rounding. So not only do you have great prep that's going to identify the opponent's weakness coming in from, you know, the players, and then of course the coaching staff with Josh Archie at the helm, then you have an IGL who is generally getting very, very good reads and is able to then even add on conditioning against your opponents to force errors. And then to supplement all that, you're playing a very util info heavy style where you don't have to put yourself at risk until it's the best time. So to me, it's kind of an evolution of the old DRX style, where DRX was very good about timings and util to get information. And then they would say, okay, information processed, this is the set play that we do this round. And that was very good. It was always very good, which is why they always consistently got top 6 in the world. But, you know, they were missing that just a bit of extra flexibility to go one step further. And G2 has that. That's what makes this team scary, and that's what makes this team so sturdy, and that's what has made this team continue to improve over the course of all the years. We have to remember, this is the core roster that used to be known as the Guard. Then they went through Ascension, now they're here representing G2. They got to go to a Masters as an Ascension team, ranked very high, and now they're going into Champions, and a lot of people have high hopes for this roster. I mean, just so we're clear, when they first debuted internationally as the Guard back before the international leagues, there was a lot of hype, and then they flopped a little bit, right? They flopped a little bit, but boy, redemption is sweet here for the G2 squad. On top of that, they've added in a new duelist in the name of Icy. Complete rookie, comes in, a lot of people are concerned, can he keep up? Let's be honest, not as explosive as some of the other duelists all around the world just because we have so many ones that are popping off. But when he pops off, he's him for sure. He's had games where he can do it, but also this is a team that doesn't need him to do that every single time. So to sum up the overall pattern and tendency of G2 is the fact that you have to find a way to deny and disrespect their utility. Now, on top of that, I also want to credit their overall line of sight and spacing when they're taking fights. It's actually really clean. Again, a very old DRX-like, and I feel like that's doing an injustice to G2 because it's making it look like DRX is the better version. But I'm saying this as in, like, they are the better version of the old DRX, in my opinion. Like, they've evolved along with the meta to maintain that style. That's very, very sturdy, very textbook with an added flavor of flexibility. Next, Valen does a great job on the attacking sides of trying to mask their conditioning tells. So what I mean by this is they'll do things like, hey, we're going to go send double initiators this time onto B side of bind. They're going to be the fake now. And the main force is going to go through showers with the duelist. But since it's both of your initiators, it's really hard to ignore that utility, right? If it's just the Sky, you think, oh, I mean, it could be a fake, guys. I really hold. But if both the Sky and the Gecko are throwing their stuff into the site, you're thinking, well, that's the only way you get information. That's the only way you're taking an advantageous fight. Surely the main force is here. We should hold. But then it turns out the main force is on the other side. But then immediately the round after that, it's actually going to be the Raze that's going to be the fake. It's the duelist now that causes the fake. So they do these things. You can tell that Valen is very conscious of the fact that what he's doing is adding layers to the enemy's mental stack. And he wants to make sure that he's hiding all the possible tells that they might have, over the grand course of a map to make sure that the enemy can't catch on from their POV. On top of this, you have standard things that they do. For instance, if the enemy's on an eco, a lot of times G2 will actually play aggressively into the enemy's eco. A lot of teams usually don't, right? Because you're like, well, I don't know, maybe they're stacked, maybe it's shotguns. But what they'll do is they'll at least push up the tempo. They won't take like all the close quarter fights, but they'll push up the tempo because now you're telling them, hey, we can do this. So they take these opportunities wherever they think they have an advantage just to plant extra stacks on the mental game against their opponents. And that gives Valen the advantage to now just read the opponent's reactions. So if I was PRX, what would Chobra do? This is a tough one because I'm just going to say this straight up. If PRX plays like they do, G2 wins. I'm just going to say that. All right? Like, I think PRX really has to gain some crazy form of patience to confidently beat G2. And I'm just going to... I've been poring over this. Trying to find, surely there's an answer. First things first, I think... not just dumping all your util for the first contact you get, right? Not just because you see someone, don't just hunt them down. Don't just go blindly for the execute and dump all your util, because after that, you don't have other ways to fight other than your own mechanics. And as great as PRX is, this is Champions. You're playing against the best in the world. You have to respect that. I think saving that extra util to give you just a bit more reach if you're on the attack is going to be very important. Quite frankly, same thing on the defense. Just dumping util just to try to take control of the early part. I mean, there's still, after that, there's still 80 seconds left in the round. G2 is going to have 2 more cycles of their util to try to get information and fake you out and pressure elsewhere. It's tough. So, I mean, even if you're not changing compositions, I think you have to be very careful about which pieces of util you're using. Now, I'm not saying just take dry contact every time at the beginning of the round, but for instance, let's say you're playing something like a Raze Fade combo. Let's just put that out there. Don't just always go for, hey, we saw him, let's throw the paint shell and the C's and then haunt deeper to see if they're still here and chase. Just throw the paint shells or just throw the haunt because it's on a cooldown. If they're there, either take the fight, back off, whatever. But if they're not, now you can take it for free, right? You can take it with just extra contact and just wait for the next fight. Because G2 generally, other than when they're trying to throw curveballs, is not a team that's immediately going to try to land a counterpunch. Next up, middles of the map are very important for G2. Why? Because they want to mid-round. They want to get reads, they want to pressure you, and then they want to shift the weight around the map. Valen wants to just see the entire map in his head and rotate everybody. He wants to command all 10 players on the server. And how do you do that if you don't have mid control? If you only have side control, now obviously bind is a exception to this because side is kind of the mid there. But if you only have the sides of the map, you're not really as clear. The information's always going to lag behind, right? It's going to be on 180 ping, and you're not going to get information until it's already too late to make a decision. So generally, you want to make sure you don't have to hold on to full mid control, but you definitely want to deny G2 as much mid control as possible. And sometimes they're leaving a lurk there. Sometimes it's just util, right? It's like Sentinel util, both on the attack and defense. Sometimes it's them trying to cover up their tracks with smokes. But whatever it is make sure that G2 doesn't have the priority on mid so that they can't mid round as quickly. That's already going to slow things down and start to make G2's movement a bit more logical. Last but not least, understand that you have to play with reach. They're always going to have more util than you, both composition-wise and stylistically. And quite frankly, this is true for PRX against like almost every other team in the world. So it's probably just a good thing to keep in mind. But just always accept the fact that they're going to have more util. So try to take the fights further. Try to get a bit extra space if you are taking the fight to them, right? And make sure that you're clearing out extra time for yourself, and be willing to back off. Don't just sit there and fight forever and don't overheat. Don't greed for it, but make sure you're getting contact early so that they now are forced out of their own tempo. Force those errors is the big name of the game. And this all sounds very easy to say. I know it's not easy, but PRX has 5 of some of the best individual players in the world. So I think they can manage it as long as they stay calm. Simple. Well, let's take a look at the maps then, shall we? To see if the maps can help us out a little bit. The good news is that G2 is going to have a go-to ban against PRX, and that's going to be Sunset. Their Sunset is not looking great. They've actually banned it 22 times. They banned it 22 times this year. 22 times! That's actually insane! So yeah, they're banning that because that's like PRX's home ground for sure. So Sunset is being banned out. Now, PRX, you have to have a bit of a choice. I mean, generally, I think against most opponents, just for the overall tournament, if you had to pick and choose, working on your Ascent was probably a better choice over the Haven. But Ascent is G2's home ground. So, and also this is where, you know, util heavy, info heavy, mid-rounding heavy teams do well. Set play heavy, everything, right? So we'll see. I mean, I would love to see PRX having prepped Haven. I just don't have that much faith, given how it's looked in the past 2 years, 2.5 years. So if you've prepped the Ascent, I guess you still have to ban the Haven, just because it's so weak for you. But then you're probably playing Ascent, right? And then your bind isn't looking good if you're PRX, or at least you're not looking confident on it. And then you have Icebox and Lotus to pick from. I mean, G2's Icebox doesn't look great, but I will say I do think the Icebox makes things a bit easier for G2. So as much as G2's Lotus win rate is pretty good, maybe Lotus is where you go, right? And you just make sure that you learn better timings against G2's style, kind of make sure that they don't have an advantage in the util. Just so we're very clear, a lot of times, the way that these double initiator compositions have advantages in util is the fact that they can get away with using their cooldown util for a lot of value. So one of the ways you can do this is by not giving them an opportunity to use it early enough to cycle through it, right? Obviously, you're still going to have ones that have extra charges. Like, they'll just save that up. But if you just make sure that they don't get to use that recon bolt very, very early, or they use it, but they don't get any value off of it, and now, the next 30 seconds, you're actually taking so much more space around the map. That's how you counter that out. So if that's something that PRX has worked on, then sure, I think the Lotus could be good. But we're probably not seeing Sunset between these two teams. And we're probably seeing Ascent. So we'll see. We'll see what PRX has cooked up. Those are my thoughts for the opening matches for Talon and PRX. This was a lot harder just because Talon and PRX are already unpredictable, and quite frankly, that's how sometimes they win out the important matches, is by doing something that none of us could predict. So that's probably better, because honestly, especially for, again, PRX, I look at it and on paper, I just think this is a really hard matchup. I actually think Leviathan and Talon is, stylistically, I think it's a toss-up. So We'll have to wait and see. I'm actually very excited to see what Talon has cooked up for that match. But these are my thoughts. Let me know down below, what do you think that these teams need to do to win their opening match? And do you think they have a good chance of doing so? Can we potentially get all the Pacific teams to win their opening match and have an advantage in the group stage? That would be great. But for now, that's going to be it. Now that the matches have started, what we're going to do from here on out is once their match is over, we figure out who the next opponent is, and then we analyze those opponents' games to see what you can target day to day as the tournament goes on. That'll be the series for What Would Chobra Do? Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.